Are you codependent? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today, and we're going to try to figure that out. First, let's talk about 3 signs of codependency, which are not all of the signs of codependency. I talk about a lot of the signs in my post, and we're going to talk about some of the signs here today in this video. But this will give you an idea if maybe you do have a codependent relationship or not. So first of all, do you find yourself taking responsibility for other people's decisions? Second, do you feel very guilty when you have to say no to people? And third, do you find yourself compromising your own wants and needs in order to conform to what other people want you to do and meet their wants and needs? And another thing to consider as you're thinking about whether you may be codependent or not is we're not only talking about romantic relationships here. So this could be a relationship between family, friends, even coworkers. It could also be definitely between a caregiver and a care receiver. It's very easy to get into a codependent relationship there. And some people even think that pet owners can have a codependent relationship with their pets. So, considering all that and considering some of the signs I just outlined, if this is starting to sound familiar to you and you want to strengthen your relationships, then stick around because we are going to talk about some of the signs of codependency. And even in our next video, we're going to talk even more about how you become interdependent, which is the opposite of being codependent. And in this video, we are going to be mixing professional theories, the signs that I'll be talking about, with my own personal experience with codependency to put some real world examples to it and hopefully give you something that you can relate to. But before we get into that, I want you to know that you should not stop depending on people. That's not what we're talking about here. Of course, we are social animals. We live in communities. We have weaknesses that we need to rely on other people who are strong where we are weak. That's never going to go away, and we don't want that to go away. We're not talking about becoming completely self-sufficient here, and we're not talking about never having to depend on anyone. Our goal in talking about codependency is to start deliberately thinking about our own behaviors and our relationship patterns, and to identify if there's any unhealthy patterns there that maybe we want to try to break. Because if we are in a codependent relationship, it could be harming us emotionally. And as you know, if you've been reading some of my posts, I talk a lot about the needs, our needs, one of them being psychological needs. And if you're in a codependent relationship, you're probably not having your psychological needs met. And if you're not having your psychological needs met, you are not going to be able to realize your full potential, which of course is what we're all trying to do. So that is the reason that we want to understand this theory. So my codependent relationship, I'll give you just a quick overview of how it started and kind of how it ended. And then we'll go into some specifics a little bit later here. But mine was with my ex-husband, Matt. So Matt and I met, I was 14 and he was 15. And we were together for a total of almost 20 years from that point. So that kind of just sets you up. I think that alone set us up to have a codependent relationship, just the fact that we met so young. But I think that because we grew up together during a very, what do I want to say? A time in your life where you're very susceptible, not susceptible, but you know, your teenage years, where your formative years. That's what I'm trying to say. So those are the years where you're kind of forming your persona and what you think is important in life and blah, blah, blah. And then, you know, because we met so young, we never knew any other kind of relationship, and we didn't have a bad relationship really until the very end. And, I mean, it might have been a little unhealthy for each of us, as we would find out later, but it wasn't bad. So we didn't know any better. We moved in right away, moved in with each other right after high school, because at that time we lived 3 hours apart, so that was a way to get over that, so we could actually see each other on a regular basis. Again, I think that led to some of the codependent components of the relationship, because we were so young and we took on these roles automatically that we weren't necessarily ready to take on, and that we didn't know what we wanted out of life at that point. So these roles didn't necessarily match up with what we wanted out of life. So like I said, we were together for about 20 years. We built our lives around each other, and we during our formative years, and then we were together for our entire adult lives until we were in our mid 30s. And like I said, this set the stage for my codependency because what happened is I didn't know how to live without him. I never had as a teen or as an adult. And eventually, in the late stages of our relationship, we started taking each other for granted and we became complacent in the relationship. And what happened is we ended up, well, at least what I think happened, I can't speak for him, but we ended up resenting the roles that we had assumed at such a young age when we didn't know any better. And that in turn caused us to become the worst versions of ourselves. So that's kind of the beginning of the codependency to the end is you turn into the worst version of yourself. But let's go back to the definition of codependency a minute because we haven't really talked about that yet. Interestingly, psychologists can't even agree on what it is, or I mean, I guess they do agree that it exists. But there are some common threads I found based on several articles and videos that I've watched. But sometimes you'll hear it called relationship dependency or emotional dependency. So just so you know, those are kind of all the same thing. So a definition, I'm going to read this definition here because I want to make sure that I get it correct. Basically, a codependency is when a person links their self-worth to what they can provide to another person. And this is the full definition from Good Therapy. Codependency involves sacrificing one's personal needs to try to meet the needs of others. Someone who is codependent has an extreme focus outside themselves. Their thoughts and actions revolve around other people, such as spouses or relatives. So, as I said, there are more signs to codependency than we're going to talk about here. So, check out the narrative post. I have 13 signs there from, I think she is a she's not a clinical psychologist. I'm sorry, I don't remember what her credentials are right now, but she's a professional in the field, is who I got those 13 steps from. But we're going to go through some of these steps and relate them to my relationship with Matt to give you some real world examples. So, one thing that made me codependent, or it was a sign that I was codependent, I should say, is that I revolved every decision of my life around him. And it was not his fault. I mean, if our personalities kind of created that situation, our natural personalities, but it was not his fault. I'm not blaming him at all. It was 100% me. But how it went is I would make the decision on my own, usually. Well, not usually, pretty much always. I would make the decision on my own. Then I would proceed to explain to him why it was the best decision for both of us. And most of the time he went along with it because he trusted me to make good decisions. And this actually encapsulates, there's a big word for you. I don't know where that came from. Encapsulates 4 signs of codependency, all wrapped up in this one area of my life. So one of them is that I felt responsible for I felt responsible for solving Matt's problems, and I guess for making his decisions too, which is what I was gonna say. I needed to feel in control all of the time. I compromised my wants and needs for what I thought was best for him because I thought that would be best for me in the long run too. And I came to believe that Matt could not live out without me. So that's one aspect of the relationship that points to codependency. Another aspect was that I needed to be needed. And maybe you can relate to this. So I just loved being needed at the time, but at the end of the day, I came to resent it so much, and I found out that it just drained so much energy from me that I did not even realize at the time. Now, I'm naturally more of a planner, a decision maker, and Matt is naturally more of someone who likes to be taken care of. That's something we've talked about. I know that for a fact. And that's neither one of those is a bad thing, but in combination, and especially if you don't have open communication about what's going on, it is not a good combination. And it worked out okay when we were younger, but as we became older and really started to mature, I would say in our late 20s, and we started to figure out what we really wanted out of life, that's when we started resenting each other, and my role morphed into one of a parent. And I started to treat Matt like a child in a lot of respects, which I feel horrible about. And as we continued to grow more and more resentful of each other, we just became more and more separate from each other because we never talked about it. So there were a few signs represented here in my need to be needed. First was that we were both compromising our needs and wants and values because he was also compromising himself to try to meet the life I had created for us or that I thought was best for us. I became resentful eventually because I thought Matt didn't recognize how much I was doing for him. And like I said, that was very draining to me. That drained a lot of my energy. And I valued my self worth at the time based on my ability to save or help Matt. And it became very apparent to me, like I said, by our late 20s, early 30s, that I was not doing a good job of that, or in my eyes. And I think that's where some of the resentment started to build as well, because I felt I was failing in that regard. And of course, that was never my responsibility to begin with. I know that now, but at the time I did not. So those are a couple of the behaviors and patterns that show up in our relationship to show that I was definitely codependent with him. So to sum it up, some of the reasons that we were codependent is we were never equal partners. That is number one. Again, we took on our roles in the relationship before we really knew what we wanted out of life, and eventually those roles, we came to resent those roles, and we both kind of wanted out of those roles. But that's really hard to do when you've been in that role for 10 years or more already. It's really kind of hard to redefine those roles. And the other thing is, then we had our baby, Emma, my little gem. I don't know where that came from either. I don't know. Bear with me, people. So, anyways, we had Emma, and when you have a child, if you haven't, you can imagine it just changes your perspective on everything, and you start to notice things that you wouldn't have noticed otherwise when you were more focused on just yourself. And I think that started to really point out our roles to each other even more. And we started to realize that we didn't want to carry out those roles anymore. So the resentments continued to build on both sides, and eventually drastic measures were taken that ended our marital relationship. So that's kind of the beginning and end of our relationship. Hopefully that helped you understand a little bit more about codependency. Check out the narrative post for more details. But I would like to tell you how you can stop being codependent. First of all, realize it's not easy, and you're going to have to sit and admit your fault, and you're going to have to admit the part that you played in creating the codependency in the relationship. I have a couple of posts to follow up this one. There's one on interdependency and there's one on attachment styles, and those will help you, or my goal is, at least in creating those, is that they will help you sort through that and start thinking about those things, about what your faults are, about what part you played in the codependency. And and I also have a worksheet to go along with this video that will also help out in that regard. So, of course, I have my tagline here. Until next time, stay curious.